Commander Vextar's forearms trembled as he raised his drink in the dim cantina of Station Omega Prim. The blue liquid inside glowed softly, casting eerie shadows across his battle-scarred face. Around him, a dozen young Calarian recruits leaned forward, their eyes wide with excitement. These fresh soldiers had never seen real combat, never faced the terror that lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy. "You want to know about humans?" Vextar's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the cantina's noise like a plasma blade. The music stopped. Even the bartender, a massive Thurian with 6 eyes, turned to listen. "Sit down, younglings. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see the universe forever." He pulled up a holographic display with his cybernetic arm, the device humming as it projected a beautiful blue-green planet above their table. The sphere rotated slowly, showing swirling white clouds and vast oceans that sparkled like jewels. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Vextar said, his voice dripping with dark irony. "This is Earth. The humans call it their home. They call it a death world. And trust me, that name doesn't even come close to describing the horror of this place." One of the recruits, a young Calarian named Ziff, raised his hand nervously. "Commander, it looks peaceful, almost pleasant." Vextar's laugh was bitter and cold. "Peaceful? Boy, 90% of their surface is covered in liquid that would dissolve our exoskeletons in minutes. That beautiful blue you see? It's hydrogen oxide, a substance so corrosive it would eat through our protective suits like acid through paper." The recruits exchanged worried glances. Their species needed special environmental suits just to survive in most atmospheric conditions. The thought of a world covered in deadly liquid was terrifying. "But that's just the beginning," Vextar continued, taking another sip of his drink. "Their atmosphere contains 21% oxygen, 21%. Our breathing apparatus would literally explode if we tried to filter that much oxidizer. Yet these humans breathe it like we breathe nitrogen. They need it to survive." He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on different parts of the planet. "Look at their weather patterns. See those white spirals? Those are hurricanes, atmospheric storms with winds that can reach 300 kilometers per hour. They have tornadoes that can lift our heaviest battle tanks and throw them like toys. Their planet regularly shakes itself apart, with earthquakes that register beyond our seismic measurement scales." Young Ziff was starting to look pale. How do they survive such conditions?" "That's the terrifying part," Vextar said, his voice growing darker. "They don't just survive, they thrive. I once watched surveillance footage from one of their cities during what they called a hurricane. While our weather analysts were predicting total destruction, I saw human children playing in the streets, laughing as they splashed through the flooding waters." The hologram shifted to show various Earth creatures. A massive predator with enormous fangs filled the display. And the creatures... Vextar shuddered, his exoskeleton clicking nervously.
"What?"
"This is what they call a tiger. A solo predator that can kill prey 3 times its size. It has retractable claws, night vision, and can leap 10 meters in a single bound. Our military scientists studied it and concluded it was the perfect biological weapon." He paused for effect, watching the recruits' faces grow more horrified. "The humans hunt these creatures for sport." Several recruits gasped. One dropped his drink, the liquid splattering across the metal floor. "But here's the part that kept me awake for cycles," Vextar continued. "I watched a recording of a human child named Taman, no more than 6 rotations old, playing with a creature they called a dog. This beast had razor-sharp fangs, powerful jaws that could crush bone, and was bred specifically for hunting and killing. The hologram showed a small human child running through a field while a 4-legged creature chased him, its mouth open, teeth visible. The child was laughing. This predator was chasing him, and he thought it was a game when it caught him. Instead of devouring him, it licked his face. They had somehow turned a killer into a companion. They domesticated a predator and made it love them." Vextar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a normal species. These humans had taken a world that should have killed them and made it their ally. They had turned every threat into a tool." every danger into an advantage. He zoomed the hologram out to show Earth from space again. The planet tried to kill them with ice ages that lasted thousands of years. They survived by learning to make fire and build shelters. Volcanic eruptions that wiped out entire species. They learned to predict them and use the fertile soil for farming. Plagues that killed millions. They developed medicine and became stronger. The old commander's cybernetic arm whirred as he clenched his fist. Every challenge made them more dangerous. Every threat they faced taught them new ways to fight, new ways to survive. They didn't just adapt to their world, they conquered it. But Commander and other recruits spoke up. Surely they must have some weakness, some limitation. Dexter's laugh was dark and humorless. We thought so too. Yeah, we thought we were about to conquer primitives who barely knew how to leave their own planet. We had energy shields, plasma weapons, faster than light travel. We had conquered 50 worlds before theirs. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. We thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy. We had no idea we were about to face the galaxy's most perfect killing machines, creatures forged by a world that had been trying to kill them for millions of years. The cantina had fallen completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed muted. The recruits sat frozen, finally beginning to understand why Commander Vexstar was the only survivor of his original unit. That was our first mistake, he said quietly. We underestimated them. We saw their primitive technology and thought we knew what we were dealing with. But you can't judge a species by their tools. You have to look at what made them, what shaped them, what turned them into what they are. His 4 eyes fixed on each recruit in turn. And what made humans was a world that never stopped trying to kill them. A world that taught them that survival meant fighting every single day, that peace was just a moment between battles, and that the only way to truly live was to never ever give up. The weight of his words settled over the young soldiers like a heavy blanket. They were beginning to understand that their upcoming deployment wasn't going to be the glorious adventure they had imagined. The Meridian Incident. Those 3 words still made Vexstar's blood run cold even after all these years. He reached for another drink, his 4 hands shaking as he gripped the glass. The young Calarian recruits watched him with growing unease, sensing that whatever came next would be far worse than tales of death worlds and killer planets. High Command called it a routine pacification mission, Vexstar said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. We had done it 1,000 times before across the galaxy. The process was always the same. Show up with overwhelming force broadcast. Surrender terms, accept their submission, and establish tributary status. Simple, clean, efficient. He activated his holographic display again, showing a massive fleet of sleek alien warships arranged in perfect formation. The vessels gleamed like silver daggers against the star-filled void, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements and energy shields that shimmered like soap bubbles. Admiral Krextall led our finest fleet, Vexstar continued, his voice filled with bitter nostalgia. 12 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon. 50 destroyers with enough firepower to crack planets. 200 fighter craft that could dance between asteroids at light speed. The pride of the Calarian Imperial Navy. One of the recruits, a young soldier named Vex, leaned forward eagerly. That sounds like enough ships to conquer an entire star system. It was Vexter replied grimly. We were facing a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. Their most advanced ships were crude chemical rockets that took months to travel between their own planets. By our calculations, the entire operation should have been finished in hours. It'd be minutes. The hologram shifted to show the human solar system a small yellow star, surrounded by several rocky worlds. It looked pathetic compared to the vast galactic empire the Calarians had built over centuries of conquest. We jumped into their system. At the edge of their territory, Vexstar said, his cybernetic eye worry as it focused on the display. Our sensors immediately detected their outer colonies. Small mining stations and research outposts scattered among the asteroids. Nothing that looked like a serious military threat. He manipulated the hologram, showing the alien fleet approaching a modest space station that orbited a large asteroid. The station was clearly human-built, blocky, functional, with none of the elegant curves of Calarian architecture. The first station we encountered was called Meridian Mining Platform 7. It was commanded by a human named Biorum. According to our intelligence, she was just a mining supervisor, not even a military officer. We expected her to surrender immediately when she saw our fleet. Vextar's expression grew dark as he remembered. Admiral Krexthal opened a communication channel. I was standing right behind him on the bridge when he delivered the standard surrender demand. This is Admiral Krexthal of the Calarian Imperial Navy. You are outmatched and outgunned. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with mercy. The old commander paused, taking a long sip of his drink. The response we got was not what we expected. Biorum's face appeared on our main screen. She was young, maybe 30 human years old, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. She looked at our massive fleet, looked at our admiral, and then she did something that shocked every officer on the bridge. She laughed. The recruits exchanged confused glances. Laughed? At 12 dreadnoughts. Actually laughed. Vextar confirmed, his voice cracking with the memory. Not nervous laughter, not the hysteria of someone facing certain death. She laughed like we had just told her the funniest joke in the universe. The hologram now showed the human woman's face, and even in the recording, her expression was one of fierce amusement rather than fear. Then she said something I'll never forget as long as I live, Vextar continued. You picked the wrong species to threaten, that's what she said. 5 words that changed everything. What happened next? Another recruit asked. His voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Vextar's cybernetic arm whirred as he clenched his fist. She cut the communication. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. We thought maybe she was reconsidering, maybe preparing to surrender after all. Admiral Krexthal was actually smiling, confident that the humans had finally seen reason. Then our sensors detected movement from the mining station. Biorum had fired up the station's engines, primitive fusion drives that were barely capable of moving the massive structure. But she wasn't trying to escape. The hologram showed the mining station slowly turning, its engines burning bright blue as it began to accelerate toward the alien fleet. She was ramming us, Vextar said, voice filled with a mixture of horror and admiration. This human woman, facing the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, had decided that if she was going to die, she was going to take as many of us with her as possible. Admiral Krexthal ordered evasive maneuvers, but our ships were in tight formation. The dreadnoughts were too massive to move quickly. Biorum had calculated her trajectory perfectly. The young recruits watched in stunned silence as the hologram showed the mining station, bigger than a small asteroid, slamming into the lead dreadnought at tremendous speed. The explosion was incredible, Vextar whispered. The mining station's fusion reactors overloaded on impact. The fireball was visible from 3 systems away. It took out our flagship instantly and damaged 2 more dreadnoughts so badly they had to retreat. But that was just the beginning, he continued, his voice growing more intense. Within minutes of the explosion, every human facility in the system went active. Ships we hadn't even detected began emerging from behind asteroids and from the shadows of planets. The hologram now showed dozens of small human vessels, crude and boxy compared to the sleek alien ships, but moving with deadly purpose. They used their own ships as guided missiles, Vextar said, his voice filled with disbelief even after all these years. Not just Biorum. Every human commander made the same choice. They turned cargo haulers into bombs, research vessels into ramming ships, even passenger transports into weapons. I watched a human captain named Jae-Sung pilot his damaged freighter directly into one of our destroyers. His ship was already breaking apart, atmosphere venting into space, but he kept flying straight at us. Right before impact, he sent us a message. Welcome to the neighborhood. The display showed the chaotic battle that followed, human ships swarming around the massive alien vessels like angry hornets around a giant. Many of the human ships were destroyed, but each one that died took alien vessels with it. They turned asteroid fields into weapons, Vextar continued, his voice growing more amazed. They used mining charges to break apart asteroids, then used magnetic fields to launch the chunks at our ships. They turned their own infrastructure against us. I saw a human engineer named Kyung Ho detonate an entire mining operation to create a debris field that would trap our fighters. Hundreds of human workers died in that explosion, but it disabled an entire squadron of our best pilots. The old commander's voice was barely above a whisper now. That's when we learned the first rule of fighting humans. They don't care about acceptable losses. They care about making you pay for every victory. In our military doctrine, we always calculated acceptable loss ratios. 10% casualties was considered heavy losses. 20% was catastrophic. But humans, they were willing to accept 100% casualties if it meant inflicting damage on us. He showed them more footage of the battle human, ships, primitive by coalition standards, somehow holding their own against vastly superior alien technology through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. They fought like they had nothing to lose because, to them, surrender was worse than death. Every human in that system knew they were facing extinction. But instead of giving up, they decided to make their deaths count. The hologram showed the final moments of the battle, the remnants of the human fleet, making one last desperate charge against the alien dreadnoughts. The battle lasted 18 hours, Vexstar said quietly. When it was over, we had lost 4 dreadnoughts, 12 destroyers, and over 60 fighters. The humans had lost everything, every ship, every station, every person who had chosen to fight. But as we surveyed the wreckage, Admiral Krexthal made a chilling discovery. The humans had transmitted everything. Every moment of the battle, every tactical decision, every sacrifice had been broadcast to the rest of their species. Vexstar's 4 eyes fixed on the recruits with laser intensity. We had won the battle, but we had given them something far more valuable than victory. We had given them knowledge. Knowledge of our tactics, our weaknesses, our technology. Somewhere in the depths of their home system, millions of humans were watching, learning, and preparing for the next battle. The cantina fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The recruits sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand what they were really facing. Vexstar's cybernetic arm whirred as he flexed it, the metal gleaming in the cantina's dim light. The artificial limb was a masterpiece of Calarian. Engineering stronger than flesh, faster than natural reflexes, equipped with microtools and sensors that could detect heartbeats through solid walls. Yet every time he looked at it, all he could think about was the human who had torn his real arm away. "This is where my original arm used to be," he said quietly, tapping the junction where metal met flesh. "Lost it to a human who was technically already dead." The recruits leaned forward, their eyes wide with horrified fascination. They'd heard stories about human soldiers, but nothing could have prepared them for what their commander was about to tell them. "The siege of Proxima Base," Vexstar began, his voice taking on the cadence of a military briefing. "After the disaster at Meridian, High Command decided we needed to establish a foothold in human territory. Proxima Base was perfect, a research facility on the edge of their solar system, isolated, lightly defended. Intelligence reported only a skeleton crew of scientists and maintenance workers." He activated his holographic display, showing a sprawling complex built into an asteroid. The base looked modern by human standards, but primitive compared to Calarian architecture. All straight lines and functional design with no artistic flourishes. "We had a full battalion," Vexstar continued, his voice filled with the confidence they had felt back then. 800 Calarian shock troops, the best in the galaxy. Veterans of 50 campaigns, equipped with plasma rifles, energy shields, and powered armor that could deflect anti-tank rounds. We were the elite of the elite. One of the recruits, a young soldier named Crix, raised his hand nervously. "How many humans were defending the base, Commander?" Vexstar's expression grew. "Dark, 12. 12 humans led by a soldier named Heian-Wu." The recruits exchanged glances. 800 against 12 seemed like impossible odds in their favor. "The assault began at dawn," Vexstar said, manipulating the hologram to show Calarian dropships descending toward the base. "Standard doctrine, overwhelming force, quick penetration, secure the facility. It should have been over in hours. But the moment our first wave entered the base, everything went wrong. The hologram shifted to show the interior of the base, a maze of corridors, laboratories, and maintenance areas. Red dots marked the positions of the Calarian soldiers, while blue dots showed the human defenders. Hien Wu had prepared the base like a fortress. Every corridor was a potential ambush point. Every room could become a trap. The humans had turned their own home into a weapon against us. Vexstar's cybernetic I-word as it focused on specific points in the display. For 3 weeks, those 12 humans held us off. Not through superior firepower or better equipment, they were using mostly improvised weapons and scavenged gear. They held us off through pure, terrifying intelligence. They didn't just fight, they hunted us through the corridors like we were prey. I lost 6 soldiers in the first day alone, and I never even saw the humans who killed them. Would strike from ventilation shafts, from behind false walls, from places our sensors couldn't detect. The old commander's voice grew more intense as he remembered the nightmare of those 3 weeks. They used our own equipment against us. A human named Jinho managed to hack into our communication systems. He spent 2 days feeding us false information, sending squads into ambushes, turning our own tactical network against us. I watched them turn maintenance shafts into killing fields. They would flood corridors with superheated steam from the base's power systems. They rigged elevators to become death traps, even weaponized the artificial gravity, turning it on and off to disorient our troops. And Crix was looking pale. But surely your superior numbers eventually won out? That's what we thought, Vexter replied grimly. Every day, we expected to finally corner them, to end the siege. But somehow, they always seemed to appear wherever we least expected them. The hologram now showed a complex network of hidden passages and maintenance tunnels that the humans had been using to move unseen throughout the base. They knew every inch of that facility. Every pipe, every wire, every hidden access panel. They moved through walls like ghosts, appearing behind us when we thought we had them trapped ahead of us. On the 10th day, I personally led a squad to hunt down a human sniper who had been picking off our soldiers. We tracked him for 6 hours through the base's lower levels. When we finally cornered him in what we thought was a dead-end corridor, he vanished. Literally vanished. It took us another day to figure out how he had done it. There was a hidden panel in the floor, leading to a maintenance shaft that was barely wide enough for a human body. He had crawled through 50 meters of that shaft, in complete darkness, to escape our trap. Vexstar's voice dropped to a whisper. But the worst part wasn't their tactics or their knowledge of the base. The worst part was their refusal to die. On the 18th day, I cornered one of them, a female named Yunji. She was small, even by human standards, probably weighing less than half what I did. She had taken 3 plasma shots to the chest. By all medical logic, she should have been dead. The recruits were completely silent now, hanging on every word. Our plasma rifles fire concentrated energy bolts that can punch through tank armor. A single shot should have been enough to kill any organic being. But this human had taken 3 direct hits and was still moving, still fighting. When I found her, she was in the base's engineering section, working on something with her bare hands. Her uniform was burned away where the plasma had hit her. I could see the wounds, massive burns, that had gone completely through her torso. She should have been unconscious from shock, if not already dead. Instead, she was setting up another trap. Vexstar's cybernetic arm word as he clenched his fist, the memory still vivid after all these years. She looked up at me when I entered the room. There was no fear in her eyes, no pain, no desperation. She just looked, I determined. I raised my rifle to finish her off. That's when she smiled at me. Actually smiled, like she'd been waiting. For me to find her, I fired. The 4th plasma shot hit her directly in the head. By every law of physics and biology, that should have been the end. But as my shot struck her, she triggered the explosive she had been hiding. The hologram showed a massive explosion tearing through a section of the base, collapsing several corridors and sealing off entire areas. The blast cost me this arm and half my squad, Vexstar said, flexing his cybernetic limb. Later, when our medical teams analyzed the scene, they made a discovery that still haunts me. According to the forensic evidence, Yunji had been clinically dead for over an hour when she killed my soldiers. The plasma wounds had severed major organs and cut off blood flow to her brain. Yet somehow she had remained conscious and functional long enough to set up that final trap. The recruits were staring at him in stunned disbelief. "How is that possible?" Vex whispered. "Our doctors couldn't explain it," Vexstar replied. "Human physiology is different from ours, but not that different. By all medical knowledge, what she did was impossible. Yet she did it anyway." That's when I realized the truth about human soldiers. They don't just fight until they die. They fight until their bodies physically cannot continue. And sometimes, even death isn't enough to stop them. He manipulated the hologram to show other incidents from the siege, humans continuing to fight with broken bones, severe burns, and wounds that would have incapacitated any other species. I watched a human named Tehain lose his left leg too. A plasma grenade. Instead of seeking medical attention, he used his belt as a tourniquet and kept fighting for 3 more hours. He took out 6 of my soldiers before we finally brought him down. Another human, Dewey, and had her weapon destroyed and was trapped in a corridor with 5 of my best troops. She fought them hand to hand with a broken piece of metal pipe. She killed 3 of them before the other 2 managed to stop her. These weren't super soldiers or genetically enhanced warriors. They were just regular humans, scientists, engineers, maintenance workers who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But they fought like demons, like creatures possessed by something beyond normal biological limitations. The old commander's voice was barely audible now. The siege lasted exactly 21 days. When it was over, all 12 humans were dead. But they had cost us 437 soldiers, more than half our battalion. In the end, we didn't defeat them through superior tactics or overwhelming force. We defeated them through pure attrition by having more bodies to throw at them than they had ammunition to stop us. But even in death, they had one final lesson to teach us. When we searched the base afterward, we found detailed records of everything they had done. Every trap, every ambush, every improvised weapon they had used. They had documented it all and transmitted it to the rest of their species. Vexter's 4 eyes fixed on each recruit in turn. They knew they were going to die. They knew from the beginning that 12 humans couldn't hold off 800 Calarian soldiers forever, but they didn't fight to win. They fought to learn, to teach, to make sure that the next humans who faced us would be better prepared. The cantina fell silent, except for the distant hum of machinery. The recruits sat in stunned silence, finally, beginning to understand what made human soldiers so terrifying. "That's the lesson of Proxima Base," Vexstar said quietly. "Humans don't just fight with their bodies or their weapons. They fight with their minds, their determination, their absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when victory is impossible. And sometimes," he added, flexing his cybernetic arm one more time, "they fight with something beyond life itself. But their individual capabilities weren't the worst part," Vexstar continued, his voice barely audible now. The old commander's 4 hands wrapped around his drink as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. It was how they fought together. We called it the pack bond, though our xenobiologists still can't fully explain it. The recruits leaned closer, sensing that whatever came next would be even more disturbing than the tales of unstoppable human soldiers. "In Calarian military doctrine, we fight as individuals within a unit structure," Vexstar explained. "Each soldier follows orders, maintains position, and executes their assigned role. It's efficient, predictable, and has served us well for centuries of conquest." He pulled up another holographic display showing a tactical map covered in red and blue dots. The image showed a massive space station orbiting a gas giant, its angular structure bristling with defensive weapons and shield generators. "The liberation of Titan Station," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a nightmare. "We had captured their forward command base and were holding 300 human prisoners. It was a perfect strategic position, heavily fortified, well-supplied, and impossible to assault directly." Young Crix raised his hand nervously. "What was the standard protocol for prisoner exchanges, Commander?" "Standard protocol suggested they would negotiate for their return," Vexstar replied. "Most civilized species follow established rules of war. You capture prisoners, They capture prisoners. Eventually you trade them back. Clean, simple, efficient. Hologram shifted to show intelligence reports and communication intercepts. We monitored their channels for weeks, waiting for the inevitable negotiation request. We were prepared to be generous, release half the prisoners in exchange for some minor territorial concessions. Instead, they sent a rescue team. The display now showed 6 small dots approaching the massive station from different vectors. The human ships were tiny compared to the Calarian fortress, no bigger than escape pods. Not a battalion or a strike. Force, Vexstar continued, his voice filled with disbelief. 6 humans led by a man named Dong Han. 6 humans against a fortress that housed 12,000 Calarian soldiers and was protected by the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy. The recruits exchanged glances. 6 against 12,000 seemed like suicide, even by human standards. Our best engineers had designed Titan Station to be impregnable, Vexstar said, manipulating the hologram to show the station's defensive grid. Multiple layers of energy shields, automated weapon systems, sensor networks that could detect a single fighter from 3 light minutes away. It was a fortress that could withstand a full fleet assault. But these 6 humans didn't attack the station. They infiltrated it. The hologram now showed the interior of the station, a maze of corridors, security checkpoints, and heavily guarded areas. 6 tiny blue dots were moving through the structure, somehow avoiding the red indicators that marked Calarian patrols. I was the duty officer that night, Vexstar said, his cybernetic eye worry as it focused on the display. I watched them move through our security systems, and what I saw defied everything I knew about military tactics. They didn't communicate through radio or tactical networks. Our sensors would have detected any electronic transmissions. They didn't use hand signals or prearranged plans. They just ... knew where each other was, knew what each other was thinking. The old commander's voice dropped to a whisper. They moved like a single organism with 6 bodies. I watched Dong Han approach a security checkpoint from the north corridor while 2 of his team members moved in from the east and west. They had no way to coordinate their timing, no way to communicate their intentions. Yet they struck at exactly the same moment, eliminating all 6 guards before any of them could raise an alarm. The hologram showed the synchronized assault. The 3 humans moving with perfect coordination despite being separated by hundreds of meters of corridor. Our xenobiologists later theorized that humans possess some form of limited telepathic ability when they're in high-stress situations with people they trust, Vexstar continued. But that doesn't explain what I witnessed that night. Another team member, a female named Sujin, was trapped in a maintenance shaft when a patrol passed beneath her. She had no way to signal her teammates, no way to warn them about the approaching guards, yet somehow the other humans knew exactly where those guards were and eliminated them before they could discover her hiding place. The recruits were staring at the display in fascination and horror. The tactical coordination being shown was beyond anything they had learned in military academy. For 4 hours, those 6 humans moved through our fortress like ghosts. Vexstar said they disabled security systems, eliminated guards, and penetrated deeper into the station than should have been possible. When the alarm finally sounded, they had already eliminated 60 guards and were extracting prisoners. But here's the part that still haunts me, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They weren't just saving the living. The hologram shifted to show the station's medical bay, where a single human body lay under a white sheet. They fought their way to the medical bay to retrieve the body of one soldier, a female named Mi Young, who had died 3 days earlier. She had been killed during the initial capture of the station, and we had placed her body in cold storage according to standard protocols. Dong Han personally carried her body for 4 kilometers through hostile territory, fighting off pursuit the entire way. His team could have moved faster without her. They could have saved more living prisoners if they hadn't wasted time on someone who was already dead. Young next looked confused. Why would they risk their mission for a corpse? It's exactly what I asked Dong Han when we finally captured him, Vexstar replied. He was wounded, exhausted, and had been fighting for 6 hours straight. But when I asked him why he had risked everything for a dead body, he looked at me with those burning human eyes and said something that chilled me to my core. The old commander's voice cracked as he remembered. "We don't leave family behind." "Ever family," Vexstar repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Not comrades, not fellow soldiers, not even friends. Family. 2 humans. Everyone who fights beside them becomes family." The hologram now showed the aftermath of the rescue Calarian ships pursuing. The escaping humans through an asteroid field, plasma bolts lighting up the darkness as the chase continued. "That's when I understood," Vexstar said quietly. "We weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting a species that would literally die before abandoning each other. Every human loss made the survivors fight harder, not weaker. I watched the pursuit for 3 hours," he continued. The human ships were damaged, outnumbered, and running low on fuel. Any rational military force would have abandoned the dead weight and concentrated on getting the living prisoners to safety. Instead, they fought even more desperately.
When
One of their ships was disabled. The others immediately moved to protect it. When Donghan's vessel took critical damage, his teammate Jin Woo transferred all his remaining fuel to keep Donghan's ship flying. The display showed the dramatic rescue, human ships sacrificing themselves to protect their wounded comrades. Jin Woo's ship ran out of power and began drifting toward the gas giant's gravity well. He could have ejected, could have saved himself. Instead, he used his ship's remaining momentum to ram one of our pursuing destroyers. His last transmission was, "Tell my family I did my job." Vexstar's cybernetic arm word as he clenched his fist. That's when I realized the true horror of fighting humans. It's not their individual strength or their tactical brilliance. Their absolute, unbreakable loyalty to each other. In most military organizations, soldiers fight for their country, their ideology, or their pay. But humans fight for each other. Every squad becomes a family. Every unit becomes a tribe. They will endure any sacrifice to protect their own. The hologram showed the final moments of the chase, the surviving human ships disappearing into hyperspace, carrying their rescued prisoners and their recovered dead. "The rescue succeeded," Vexstar said quietly.
Nice.
They extracted 247 living prisoners and recovered the bodies of 8 dead soldiers. The cost was 4 of their 6 rescue ships and the lives of 12 human soldiers. By any rational military analysis, it was a disaster. They lost more people than they saved. But to the humans, it was a complete victory because they had brought their family home. The old commander's 4 eyes fixed on each recruit in turn. That's the lesson of Titan Station. When you fight one human, you're fighting all of them. When you capture one human, you're challenging all of them. When you kill one human, you're making enemies of all of them. And they never, ever forget. The cantina fell silent, except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The recruits sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand why the war with humanity had been so devastating. "Most species fight until the cost becomes too high," Vexstar said softly. "Humans fight until there's nothing left to fight for. And as long as they have each other, they always have something to fight for." He finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. "That's why we lost the war before it really began. We thought we were fighting individuals. We were actually fighting a species that had turned warfare into an act of love." Vexstar set down his drink and looked at each recruit in turn, his 4 eyes reflecting the pain of memories that would never fade. The cantina around them had grown. Completely silent, even the background. Chatter from other tables had stopped as patrons strained to hear the conclusion of his tale. "The war lasted 17 years, he began, his voice carrying the weight of those lost years. 17 years of the most brutal, horrific combat the galaxy had ever seen. And we were losing." The recruits shifted uncomfortably. They had been taught that the Calarian Empire was invincible, that their military might was unmatched across the galaxy. The idea that they could lose to any species, especially one as primitive as humanity, seemed impossible. "Not because we couldn't win battles," Vexstar continued, his cybernetic arm worry softly as he gestured. "We won many. The Battle of Europa, the Siege of Mars Station, the assault on the asteroid belt. tactical victories that should have broken any reasonable enemy. He activated his holographic display one final time, showing a galaxy-wide map marked with the locations of hundreds of battles. Red dots marked Calarian victories, blue dots marked human victories, and yellow dots marked inconclusive engagements. The pattern was clear. The red dots outnumbered the blue ones significantly. Not because we lacked resources, he added, but the entire coalition's support. The Therians provided their manufacturing capabilities. The Zephyrians contributed their technological expertise, and the Vorthon Republic opened their treasury to fund our war effort. We had unlimited supplies, unlimited reinforcements, unlimited support. Young Crix raised his hand tentatively. Then why were we losing, Commander? Vextar's expression grew haunted. We were losing because we finally understood what we were truly fighting. This wasn't a war against a military or a government or even a planet. This was a war against an idea. The idea that surrender was not an option. That freedom was worth any sacrifice. That some things were more important than survival itself. He stood up slowly, his movements betraying his age and the countless injuries he had sustained over the years. His cybernetic leg clicked softly against the floor as he balanced himself against the table. In the final year I was stationed on the monitoring post at Kepler 9. My job was to assess human population centers for strategic targeting. High Command wanted to know which cities, which colonies, which installations would cause the most psychological damage if destroyed. The hologram shifted to show surveillance footage from human worlds, cities bustling with activity, spaceports filled with ships, industrial centers producing everything from food to weapons. Do you know what I found? Vextar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The recruits remained silent, terrified of what they might hear. Their population was growing. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The recruits stared at him in disbelief. In the middle of a war of extermination, they were having children. On battleships, in bunkers, in the ruins of bombed cities. They were teaching their young to fight before they could walk. The hologram now showed images that would haunt Vextar for the rest of his life. Human children learning to use weapons. Families living in makeshift shelters carved from asteroid rock. Schools operating in the cargo holds of warships. I watched. A surveillance recording of a human child named Woojin. No more than 4 rotations old. Field strip a plasma rifle while his mother planned ambush strategies against our forces. His tiny hands moved with practiced efficiency, breaking down the weapon and reassembling it in minutes. Vextar's voice cracked as he continued. The child was singing while he worked. Singing? A 4-year-old who had never known peace, who had been born into a galaxy at war, was singing as he prepared weapons to kill my people. That's when I knew we could never win. The old commander manipulated the hologram to show more footage, human families working together to build fortifications. Children as young as 6 years old, serving as lookouts and messengers, elderly, humans teaching combat tactics to teenagers. Every human civilian was a potential soldier. Every human child was a future enemy. Every human settlement was a military base. We weren't fighting an army, we were fighting an entire species that had decided to become warriors. He showed them footage of human shipyards where children worked, alongside adults, building weapons and ships with their own hands. I watched human families spend their days, manufacturing ammunition, and their nights, telling their children stories about the heroes who had died fighting us. They were turning their children into living weapons through bedtime stories. The recruits were pale now, beginning to understand the true scope of what they were facing. The most terrifying part was their efficiency, Vextar continued. In 17 years of war, they had transformed their entire civilization into a military machine. Every human settlement became a fortress. Every human ship became a weapon. Every human citizen became a soldier. The hologram showed the evolution of human technology over the course of the war, their ships becoming more advanced, their weapons more deadly, their tactics more sophisticated. They learned from every battle, every defeat, every victory. Studied our technology, reverse-engineered our weapons, and improved upon our designs. By the end of the war, their ships were faster than ours, their weapons more accurate, their armor more protective. But the worst part was their morale, Vexstar said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Most species start to question a war after years of casualties and destruction. Humans became more determined. Every loss made them angrier. Every destroyed city made them more committed to victory. The hologram now showed the final months of the war. Human forces pushing deeper into coalition territory. Their ships bearing the names of fallen heroes, their crews fighting with a fury that terrified even veteran alien soldiers. We didn't sue for peace because we couldn't defeat them in battle, Vexstar said quietly. We sued for peace because we realized that even if we killed every human in the galaxy except one, that last human would find a way to take half of us with them. And they would be smiling when they did it. He turned to leave, then paused, his cybernetic eye focusing on something in the distance. The peace treaty was signed by a human diplomat named Da Yun. She was young, probably no more than 30 human years old. But she negotiated with the confidence of someone who had already won. When the ceremony was over, she thanked us for the learning experience and suggested we keep in touch. Even in victory, they were planning for the next war. Vexstar limped toward the exit, his cybernetic arm whirring softly as he reached for the door control. The treaty established trade agreements, diplomatic protocols, and mutual defense pacts. But I knew the truth. We hadn't made peace with humans. We had simply agreed to stop fighting them until they decided we were a threat again. He paused at the threshold, his 4 eyes reflecting the weight of everything he had seen. Sleep well tonight, recruits, and pray to whatever gods you follow that humanity never decides we're a threat again, because next time they won't just be fighting for survival. They'll be fighting for revenge. And they remember everything. The cantina fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The recruits sat in stunned silence, finally understanding why the galaxy's most advanced civilizations now went to extraordinary lengths to avoid conflict with the species they had once dismissed as primitive. Through the viewport, the stars shone with their eternal light, indifferent to the fears and hopes of the creatures who traveled between them. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, humanity continued to grow, learn, and remember. Their ships carried the names of fallen heroes. Their children learned the stories of those who had died fighting for freedom. And their leaders planned for a future where no species would ever again threaten their right to exist. And somewhere, in that vast darkness, they were still smiling. The recruits finally began to disperse, each one carrying with them the knowledge that would shape their understanding of humanity for the rest of their lives. They had come to the cantina expecting tales of glory and conquest. Instead, they had learned the most important lesson a soldier could know, that some enemies are too dangerous to fight, and some victories are too costly to achieve. In the depths of space, the human fleet continued its eternal patrol, watching, waiting, and preparing for whatever challenges the galaxy might bring. They had learned that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of strength sufficient to deter it. And in the silence between the stars, they were still learning, still growing, still remembering, still smiling. The end.